Disclaimer. This video examines investigative procedures and forensic analysis based on public records and official documents. Out of respect for those affected, certain details have been omitted. Our focus is on systemic questions, not speculation. Federal authorities are calling it one of the most deceptive family annihilation cases in American history. The Chris Watts case presents a timeline where a husband's lies unraveled within 48 hours. The Chris Watts case has every type of documentation showing premeditated murder disguised as a missing persons case. A 33-year-old man reported his pregnant wife and two young daughters missing on August 13, 2018. He appeared on television news pleading for their safe return. Within 48 hours, he confessed to killing all three and disposing of their bodies at his workplace oil field. Right now, evidence of planning and deception that was overwhelming. Internet searches weeks before the murders for secluded wedding locations with his mistress. Deleted text messages showing an affair. GPS data from his work truck placing him at the oil field site where he disposed of the bodies. Security camera footage from a neighbor's home contradicting every statement he made to police about the timeline. Authorities detected his deception immediately during the very first interview conducted during the welfare check, something visible in body language and behavioral analysis that would later be studied by criminal psychology experts worldwide. Shanann Watts, 34 years old, was 15 weeks pregnant with a baby boy they planned to name Nico. Bella Watts was 4 years. Celeste Watts was 3 years. All three were reported missing on the afternoon of August 13, 2018. Their bodies were found on August 16th. Chris Watts confessed on August 15th after failing a polygraph examination. The timeline from missing person report to confession and recovery of bodies was less than 72 hours. The evidence against Chris Watts was so overwhelming that maintaining deception became impossible despite his attempts to appear as a distraught husband and father. The Frederick Police Department and FBI attribute the rapid resolution to immediate recognition of inconsistencies in Chris Watts' statements, behavior, and demeanor during the initial welfare check, combined with physical evidence that contradicted his account. Even more disturbing, the entire family annihilation was committed in the early morning hours of August 13th, while the children were in their beds, and Chris Watts went to work at his job that same day as if nothing had happened, attending meeting, performing normal work duty. The Chris Watts case broke national conversations about family annihilation, narcissistic personality patterns in seemingly normal individuals, and how perfect social media portrayals can hide deadly relationship dynamics. Here's what exposes the warning signs that friends and family missed. A marriage that appeared perfect on social media was actually disintegrating behind the scenes. A man who seemed like a devoted father to those who knew him casually was planning to eliminate his family to start a new life. Co-workers, neighbors, and even close friends saw no signs of violence or rage, yet he killed his pregnant wife and two small children in cold calculation. What does this say about our ability to recognize danger in people we think about that? Before we dive deeper into this investigation, if you want to understand how investigators identified deception within hours of meeting Chris Watts, and how this case changed our understanding of family annihilation psychology, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what we're about to examine will show you the patterns investigators use to identify deception and the psychological profile of family annihilators who hide in plain sight. And drop a comment telling us, what made Chris Watts believe he could get away with murdering his entire family? Let's talk about the Watts family as they appeared to the outside world. Shanann Catherine Watts, born January 10, 1984, was 34 years old in August 2018. She worked as an independent consultant for Lavelle, a multi-level marketing company that sells health and wellness products under the brand name Thrive. Shanann was very active on social media, particularly Facebook, where she had built a significant following. She regularly posted about her life, her marriage to Chris, her two daughters Bella and Celeste, her work with Thrive, and her pregnancy with their third child. To her thousands of Facebook followers and friends, Shanann's life looked ideal. She lived in a beautiful home in Frederick, Colorado, a Denver suburb. She had two adorable young daughters who appeared in countless videos and photos. She had a handsome husband who seemed supportive and loving in the posts that featured him. She traveled for work conferences. She appeared to be successful in her business. She posted about date nights with Chris, family vacations, her excitement about the new baby. The overall picture was of a happy, thriving family living the American dream. Christopher Lee Watts, born May 16, 1985, was 33 years old in August 2018. He worked as an operator for Anadarko Petroleum, an oil and gas company. His job involved traveling to remote oil well sites and tank batteries in Weld County, Colorado, performing maintenance, checking equipment, and ensuring operations ran smoothly. It was a job that required him to work alone much of the time. driving to various field locations in rural areas northeast of Denver. Chris was described by virtually everyone who knew him as quiet, nice, maybe a bit shy or introverted, but friendly when you talked to him. Neighbors described him as a good neighbor, helpful, would wave and say hello, helped with yard work, seemed like a devoted dad who played with his kids outside. Co-workers described him as a reliable worker, maybe not the most talkative guy, but competent at his job, easy to get along with. Friends described him as a good guy, supportive of Shanann, involved with his kids. To everyone on the outside, Chris Watts appeared to be exactly what he seemed to be, a normal guy, a good father, a solid husband. Bella Marie Watts, born December 17, 2013, was 4 years old. Celeste Rosanna Watts, born July 17, 2015, was 3 years old. Two little girls who loved their parents, played together, appeared happy and healthy in the countless photos and videos their mother posted. They were typical young children living what seemed like a normal, happy childhood in a nice suburban home. In June 2018, Shanann announced on Facebook that she was pregnant with their third child, a boy. The announcement was made via a video showing Chris's reaction when she told him. In the video, Chris appears happy, saying, "Really?" with apparent excitement, hugging Shanann. Friends and family congratulated them in the comments. Everything still appeared fine to outside observers. Shanann posted about pregnancy symptoms, about how the girls were excited to be big sisters, about preparing for the baby. The public narrative was positive, but beneath the surface, the marriage was collapsing. The relationship was falling apart. Financial pressures were building, and Chris Watts was living a secret life that nobody knew about. The disconnect between the public image and the private reality was extreme. Here's where everything starts to go wrong, though the warning signs weren't visible to those on the outside. In June 2018, the same month Shanann announced her pregnancy, Chris Watts met Nicole Kessinger. She was working as a contract employee for Anadarko Petroleum in the environmental department. They began working at the same location, saw each other regularly, and started talking. The conversations became personal quickly. By late June or early July, they began a romantic and sexual relationship. Chris told Nicole that his marriage was essentially over, that he and Shanann were in the process of separating, that the relationship had been dead emotionally for a long time. This was a lie. Shanann had no idea Chris was unhappy or contemplating separation, and she certainly had no idea he was involved with another woman. During July 2018, while Chris was beginning his affair with Nicole, Shanann and the girls traveled to North Carolina to visit Shanann's family for an extended stay, approximately 6 weeks. This was a planned trip. Shanann's family lived in Aberdeen, North Carolina, and she wanted to spend time with them, especially since she was pregnant, and this might be the last opportunity for a long visit before the baby came. The plan was for Chris to stay in Colorado to work, and then join them for a weekend visit. While Shanann and the girls were in North Carolina, Chris's relationship with Nicole intensified dramatically. He acted like a single man. They went on dates to restaurants, went to the sand dunes for a day trip, spent nights together at Chris's house. Chris was Googling things like secluded romantic getaways and looking at wedding venues. He was planning a future with Nicole. He told her he was going to get divorced, sell the house, have shared custody of his kids, and start fresh. He was making specific plans about what their life together would look like. Meanwhile, Shanann was in North Carolina with her family, posting on Facebook about how much the girls missed their daddy, how she missed Chris, how she was looking forward to coming home and being together again. She had no idea what Chris was doing in Colorado. Friends of Shanann would later say that during this North Carolina trip, Shanann did mention to them that she felt like something was off with Chris. She said he seemed distant when they talked on the phone. She said he seemed different somehow. But she attributed it to the stress of being apart for 6 weeks, and maybe pregnancy hormones making her overly sensitive. August 7, 2018, Shanann and the girls returned home to Colorado, North Carolina. Shanann hoped that being back together as a family would help whatever distance she'd been feeling from Chris. Instead, the tension was immediately obvious. Chris was cold toward her. He was distant. He didn't want physical affection. He slept downstairs in the basement, or on the couch instead of in their bed. When Shanann tried to talk to him about what was wrong, he gave vague answers about needing space, needing time to think, feeling stressed. Shanann confided in close friends via text message that something was very wrong with her. She texted one friend saying she felt like she was dying inside, that Chris wouldn't touch her, that he seemed to have checked out of the marriage emotionally. She asked Chris directly if he was having an affair. He denied it. She asked if he wanted a separation. He said he didn't know, he needed time to think. These conversations happened over several days in early August after Shanann returned to North Carolina. August 10th, 12th, Shanann attended a work conference in Scottsdale, Arizona for Lavelle. She traveled to Arizona for the weekend for this conference. While she was gone, Chris spent the entire weekend with Nicole Kessinger. They were together constantly. He told Nicole that he was definitely going to separate from Shanann, that they were going to put the house up for sale, that he would have the kids on a shared custody schedule. He was telling Nicole that his future was with her, that everything was going to work out, that he just needed to get through the process of ending his marriage. But the inconsistencies don't stop there. In fact, the actual murders and the investigation that followed revealed a level of deception and cold calculation that shocked even experienced homicide investigators. August 13th, 2018. Early morning, Shanann returns home from her work trip in Arizona. A neighbor's security camera, a Ring doorbell camera belonging to Nate Trinastic, who lived next door, captured Shanann being dropped off at the house by her friend Nicole Atkinson at approximately 1:48 a.m. Shanann had been on a delayed flight, and Nicole gave her a ride home from the airport. The video shows Shanann getting her suitcase out of the car, waving goodbye to Nicole, and entering her house. This would be the last time anyone outside the Watts home would see Shanann alive. According to Chris Watts' eventual confession, here's what happened in the hours that followed. Shanann came into the house. Chris was away, unusual for that time of year. They began talking about their marriage. Shanann confronted Chris again about whether he was having an affair. This time, Chris admitted it. Shanann was devastated. The conversation became emotional. According to Chris's account, Shanann said she was going to keep the baby from him, that he would never see the kids, that she was going to make his life difficult. Chris claims that during this argument, while they were both on the bed in the master bedroom, he told Shanann that he wanted a separation and wanted to end the marriage. According to Chris, Shanann became very upset and said, "You're never going to see the kids again." Chris claims that when she said this, he snapped. He says he climbed on top of her and strangled her to death with his bare hands on their bed. However, investigators and forensic psychologists have noted that this account, Chris's claim that he killed Shanann in a rage during an argument, doesn't fit with the rest of what happened that night and the evidence of planning. What happened next, according to Chris's confession, reveals that this was not a sudden crime of passion, but a calculated plan. Chris says that after he strangled Shanann, their daughter Bella woke up and came into the bedroom. She saw her mother on the bed and asked, "What's wrong with Mommy?" or "What happened to Mommy?" Chris told Bella that Mommy was sick. He took Bella back to her room. Then, according to his confession, he went to the girls' rooms and smothered both Bella and Celeste with a blanket or pillow while they were in their beds. He killed his daughters after he killed their mother. Then Chris loaded Shanann's body into the back seat of his work truck, a company-provided vehicle. He covered her body with a sheet. He went back inside and carried Bella's small body to the truck and placed it in the back seat next to Shanann. He did the same with Celeste's body. He loaded all three bodies into his truck while it was still dark, approximately 5 a.m. or so. He also loaded tools, including a shovel and other items, into the truck. The neighbor's security camera captured Chris's truck backing out of the driveway and leaving at approximately 5:27 a.m. on August 13th. This video would later be crucial evidence showing the timeline of when Chris left the house with the bodies. Chris then drove approximately 45 minutes to a remote oil and gas well site called Survey 319, a location owned by Anadarko Petroleum where Chris worked. This site was far from any homes or roads, in a desolate area of Weld County. At the Survey 319 site, there were multiple oil storage tanks and a battery of equipment. Chris buried Shanann's body in a shallow grave near one of the tank batteries. He then took his daughter's bodies and, in an act that horrified everyone who later learned of it, he stuffed their small bodies through 8-inch diameter hatches on top of 2 separate oil storage tanks. Bella and Celeste's bodies were submerged in crude oil inside these tanks. Chris then tried to conceal or clean up evidence, left the site, and went to a work meeting that morning as if it were a normal day. Throughout the day on August 13th, Chris attended work meetings, spoke with co-workers, responded to work email, and conducted normal business activities. Nobody at his workplace noticed anything wrong with his behavior or demeanor. He appeared normal. Later that same afternoon, Chris's entire world started to unravel. Around midday, Shanann's friend Nicole Atkinson became concerned. Shanann had a doctor's appointment that morning at 10:00 a.m. for a prenatal checkup. Shanann didn't show up for the appointment, which was completely unlike her. She was diligent about her pregnancy. Nicole tried calling and texting Shanann multiple times. No response. Shanann's phone was going to voicemail. Texts weren't being read or answered. This was very unusual. Shanann was constantly on her phone for her work and stayed in close contact with friends. Nicole drove to the Watts house around 12:00 p.m. She knocked on the door. No answer. She could see Shanann's car in the garage windows. That was odd. If Shanann wasn't home, where was she? And why wasn't she answering her phone? Nicole called Chris at work. Chris said he was at a work site and didn't know where Shanann was. He said they'd had an emotional conversation and she'd said she was going to take the kids to a friend's house. But he didn't know which friend. This story immediately seemed wrong to Nicole. Shanann wouldn't miss a doctor's appointment. She wouldn't take the kids somewhere without her phone, without her car, and without telling anyone where she was going. Something was very wrong. Nicole called the Frederick Police Department to request a welfare check. Officer Scott Coonrod responded to the welfare check request and arrived at the Watts residence around 1:40 p.m. on August 13th. Nicole was there waiting. Officer Coonrod knocked on the door. No answer. He looked through windows. Lights were off. No movement inside. He called Chris Watts, who said he was on his way home from work and would be there shortly to let police inside. Chris arrived home around 2 p.m. Officer Coonrod's body-worn camera captured the entire interaction that followed, and this footage would later become some of the most analyzed police body cam video in criminal psychology and law enforcement training. Chris arrived and appeared calm, almost casual. He unlocked the door and let Officer Coonrod and Nicole into the house. As they walked through the house, Chris explained that he and Shanann had an emotional conversation that she'd said she was going to take the girls to a friend's house, but she didn't say which friend and he didn't ask because he didn't want to get into another argument. Officer Coonrod asked basic questions. When did you last see her? This morning before I left for work. What was she wearing? I don't remember. Did she take anything with her? I don't know. Chris's answers were vague and lacking in the kind of detail you'd expect from someone whose wife and children had just gone missing. As they walked through the house, Officer Coonrod observed, and Chris pointed out various things. Shanann's wedding ring was on the kitchen counter. Her phone was on the couch in the living room. Her purse was there. Her car keys were there. Her medication that she took daily for her lupus condition was there. Basically, everything Shanann would need if she left the house was still there, but she and the kids were gone. This made no sense if she had voluntarily left. Chris's affect during this interaction was notably flat. He wasn't frantic. He wasn't demanding that police do more to find his family immediately. He wasn't crying or showing distress. He was just calmly walking through the house with police, answering questions in a detached way. At one point, when Officer Coonrod asked if Shanann had any health issues, Chris hesitated and then said, "Well, she's pregnant." The way he said it, almost like an afterthought, struck Officer Coonrod as odd. Your pregnant wife is missing, and you mentioned that as an aside? Nicole Atkinson, who was present during this welfare check, later told investigators that Chris's behavior was completely wrong. She said he showed no emotion, no urgency, no fear for Shanann's safety. She said it felt like he was going through the motions of pretending to be concerned but wasn't actually concerned. She told police she felt something was very wrong with how Chris was acting. Officer Coonrod, an experienced officer, noted multiple red flags during this initial contact. Chris's story about Shanann leaving with the kids made no sense given that all her belongings were there. Chris's demeanor was inconsistent with a husband whose pregnant wife and young children were missing. His answers were evasive. His body language was off. Minimal eye contact, fidgeting, appearing uncomfortable when asked certain questions. Within hours of this initial welfare check, Frederick police began treating this as a criminal investigation, rather than just a missing persons case. And then something that shouldn't exist appeared in the investigation, evidence that would demolish Chris Watts' story completely. That evening, August 13th, Chris did an interview with a local news station, Channel 9 News in Denver. He agreed to go on camera and make a public plea for Shanann and the girls to come home. This interview, like the body cam footage, would later be analyzed extensively for signs of deception. In the interview, Chris stood in front of his house and spoke to the reporter. He said, "Shanann, Bella, Celeste, if you're out there, just come back. If somebody has her, please bring her back. I need to see everybody. I need to see everybody again. This house is not complete without anybody here. Please bring them back." The words sound appropriate, but Chris's delivery was flat. There was no emotion in his voice, no tears, no breaking down. He looked uncomfortable, like he was reading from a script. Body language experts who later reviewed this interview noted numerous deception indicators. Chris kept looking down and to his left when speaking. He used distancing language saying "everybody" instead of "my wife and daughters." He referenced the house not being complete rather than focusing on his fear for their safety, and his affect didn't match the words he was saying. That night, August 13th into 14th, Frederick police and investigators from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation conducted extensive interviews with Chris Watts at the Frederick Police Department. The interviews were recorded. Chris stuck to his story. Shanann left with the kids after an emotional conversation. He didn't know where they went. He wanted them found. He claimed to be a worried husband and father, but investigators noticed the same things Officer Coonrod did. Chris's story had holes. His timeline didn't make sense. Shanann's car was at the house. Her phone was at the house. All her belongings were there. So how did she leave? Chris said maybe a friend picked her up, but he couldn't name which friend. He said maybe she called an Uber, but there was no record of that. His answers didn't add up. Investigators also learned very quickly about the affair with Nicole Kessinger. They found evidence of the affair through phone records and text messaging. When they confronted Chris about it during interviews, he initially denied it, then admitted he'd been having an affair, but claimed it was just an emotional, not physical. This was another lie. Investigators contacted Nicole Kessinger, who confirmed a full sexual relationship and said she'd been told by Chris that his marriage was over. August 14th, police executed search warrants on the Watts home and Chris's work truck. They collected evidence, including phones, computers, GPS data from the truck, and samples from the house. They used luminol to check for blood evidence. They found evidence that certain areas of the house had been recently and thoroughly cleaned. They found that Chris's work truck GPS showed he had driven to a remote area the morning of August 13th, specifically to the Survey 3119 oil site, and spent time there before going to his scheduled work activity. Investigators also reviewed the neighbor Nate's security camera. This footage showed Shanann arriving home at 1:48 a.m. on August 13th. It showed Chris's truck leaving at 5:27 a.m. Critically, the footage did not show Shanann leaving the house at any point on the morning of August 13th. If Shanann had left with the kids as Chris claimed, the camera should have captured it, but it didn't. This directly contradicted Chris's story. On August 15th, 2 days after Shanann and the girls were reported missing, Chris Watts was asked to take a polygraph. He agreed. This was a critical mistake on his part. The polygraph was administered at the Frederick Police Department. Chris failed it dramatically. The polygraph indicated deception on every key question. Did you harm Shanann? Deception. Do you know where Shanann is? Deception indicated. Did you cause the disappearance of your daughters? Deception indicated. After the polygraph, investigators confronted Chris with the results. They told him he failed. They told him they knew he was lying. They said the physical evidence contradicted his story. They applied psychological pressure. They said that if something happened during an argument, if things got out of hand, if it was an accident or a moment of rage, now was the time to tell them the truth. They suggested that they understood emotions can run high, that they needed his side of the story. Chris Watts, under this pressure, broke down and confessed, but he didn't tell the truth. Instead, he told a new lie designed to make himself look slightly less monstrous. Chris admitted that yes, he killed Shanann, but his story was that he killed her because he saw her strangling their daughters on the baby monitor in their bedroom. He claimed he woke up, looked at the baby monitor app on his phone, and saw Shanann strangling Bella and Celeste on the monitor screen. He claimed he ran upstairs to the girls' room and found Shanann had killed them or was in the process of killing them. He claims he then, in a rage at what Shanann had done, strangled her to death. Then, he said, he panicked. He didn't know what to do. He decided to dispose of all 3 bodies at the oil field to cover everything up. He said he loaded them in his truck, drove to Survey 3119, and disposed of the bodies. This story was designed to shift some blame to Shanann, to suggest that she killed the children, and he killed her in response, and then panicked and made bad decisions. This would potentially get him a lesser charge than if he had killed all 3 in cold blood. But investigators didn't believe this story for multiple reasons. First, there was no evidence that Bella and Celeste were harmed in their bedroom. Second, the baby monitor story didn't make sense with the physical evidence and timeline. Third, Shanann had no motive to harm her children, and all evidence showed she was a loving, devoted mother. Fourth, the way Chris told this story, his affect and demeanor, didn't match someone who had killed his wife to save his children. But for now, Chris stuck to this version of events. Based on this confession, even though investigators believed it was partially false, they now knew where to look for the bodies. August 16, 2018, early morning. Frederick Police, Colorado Bureau of Investigation agents, and FBI agents went to the Survey 319 oil and gas site in rural Weld County, the location Chris had confessed to using for body disposal. The recovery operation was conducted carefully, with great care for the dignity of the victim. They found Shanann's body buried in a shallow grave near one of the tank batteries, exactly where Chris had described. Then came the horrific discovery of Bella and Celeste. Their small bodies were inside oil storage tank, submerged in crude oil. The process of recovering their bodies was technically difficult and emotionally traumatic for everyone involved. The oil had to be carefully drained from the tanks, a process that took hours. Then the girls' bodies had to be carefully extracted through the small hatches. The sight of those 2 little girls' bodies being pulled from oil tanks was described by investigators as one of the most horrific things they'd ever witnessed in their careers. Autopsies were performed by the Weld County Coroner's Office. The results confirmed that Shanann died from strangulation. Bella and Celeste died from asphyxiation. The evidence indicated that the girls were smothered, not strangled like their mother. The autopsy also confirmed that Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant with a male fetus at the time of her death. All 3 murders, plus the death of the unborn baby, were now confirmed as homicide. But here's the mathematical problem with Chris's story about Shanann killing the girls. The physical evidence didn't support it. The girls' bodies showed injuries consistent with smothering, not strangulation. If Shanann had strangled them as Chris claimed, the injury patterns would be different. Additionally, the timeline didn't. Chris claimed he saw this happening on the baby monitor and intervened, but the time it would take for him to get from the bedroom to the girls' room wouldn't allow for Shanann to have already killed both children by the time he got there, especially given that the girls were in separate rooms. Furthermore, investigators found evidence on Shanann's body that indicated she may have been in bed, possibly asleep, when she was killed. There were no defensive wounds suggesting she fought back, which is unusual unless she was attacked while sleeping or otherwise incapacitated. The totality of the evidence suggested that Chris's story about Shanann killing the girls was false, that in reality Chris had killed all three, probably Shanann first and then the girls. Chris Watts was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder after deliberation for the deaths of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste, 2 counts of murdering a child under 12 by a person in a position of trust, 1 count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. The charges carried potential penalties up to and including the death penalty. This raises an even more serious question. Why did Chris Watts kill his family? What was the motive? The investigation revealed a clear motive, and it's as chilling in its banality as the murders themselves. Chris wanted a new life with Nicole Kessinger. His family, Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and the unborn baby, were obstacles to that new life. He didn't want to deal with a divorce. He didn't want to pay child support and alimony. He didn't want the financial and logistical complications of shared custody. He didn't want Nicole to have to deal with his ex-wife and kids as part of their relationship. He wanted a clean break, a fresh start, and the only way he sought to achieve that was to eliminate his existing family entirely. Evidence from Chris's phone and computer showed internet searches in the weeks before the murders. He searched for how to get out of a marriage, secluded romantic getaway, and disturbingly, when to say I love you for the first time in a new relationship, just days before he killed his family. He was planning his future with Nicole, while simultaneously planning to murder Shanann, Bella, and Celeste. Text messages between Chris and Nicole showed him telling her that things were going to change soon, that he was going to be free, that they could have the life they wanted together. Nicole Kessinger told investigators she had no idea what he meant by these statements at the time. She said if she had known he was planning murder, she would have gone to police immediately. She cooperated fully with the investigation, provided her phone and all communication, and has maintained that she was deceived by Chris about the state of his marriage and had no involvement in or knowledge of his plan. The case against Chris Watts was overwhelming. Video evidence placed him at the scene. GPS data showed his movements. Physical evidence from the bodies and crime scenes was conclusive. His own confessions, even though parts were lies, admitted to the killings. He had clear motive. There was no viable defense. Chris's attorneys advised him that if the case went to trial, he would almost certainly be convicted and could face the death penalty. Colorado had the death penalty at that time, and this case, the murder of a pregnant woman and 2 small children, met the criteria for capital punishment. Prosecutors were preparing to seek death. In November 2018, Chris Watts accepted a plea agreement. In exchange for pleading guilty to all charges and accepting a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole, the death penalty was taken off the table. Shanann's family, her parents Frank and Sandra Rzucek and her brother Frankie, supported this plea deal. They stated that they didn't want to endure a trial where crime scene photos, autopsy details, and the horrific specifics of how Shanann, Bella, and Celeste were killed would be presented in open court. They wanted to avoid that trauma. They also wanted the certainty that Chris would never be free, rather than going through years of death penalty. On November 19, 2018, Chris Watts was sentenced in Weld County Court. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole for the 3 murder convictions, plus additional years for the other charges, all to be served consecutively. The practical effect is that Chris Watts will die in prison. He will never be released. During the sentencing hearing, members of Shanann's family gave victim impact statement. Frank Rzucek, Shanann's father, spoke about Shanann's dreams, her love for her children, how she had so much life ahead of her, and about Nico, the grandson he will never meet. Frankie Rzucek, Shanann's brother, spoke about the pain and loss the family endures every day. The statements were heartbreaking and emotional. Chris Watts sat at the defense table showing minimal emotion, the same flat effect he'd shown since the beginning. Chris's own parents, Cindy and Ronnie Watts, did not make statements at the sentencing. They have maintained a complicated position throughout, at times seeming to defend Chris or suggest that Shanann was somehow partially to for the marriage problems. Statements that enraged Shanann's family and the public. The relationship between the 2 families is completely severed. Here's what investigative files won't tell you about the psychological analysis of this case. Family annihilation cases are rare, but follow certain patterns. Chris Watts fits a specific profile that forensic psychologists have identified. Dr. Lena Derhally, a licensed psychologist who wrote a book analyzing the Watts case, identified Chris as displaying characteristics consistent with covert narcissism. Unlike overt narcissists, who are obviously self-centered and grandiose, covert narcissists appear humble and nice on the surface, but are deeply self-focused internally. They crave admiration but present as victims or as selfless. They lack genuine empathy but can mimic appropriate emotional responses. They view other people as objects that serve their needs rather than as individuals with their own worth. Dr. Durhally noted that Chris's ability to go to work the day he killed his family, to do a television interview pleading for their return while knowing he'd killed them, and to maintain a calm facade while being interrogated, all indicate an extreme level of compartmentalization and lack of empathy. Normal people who kill in a moment of passion or rage typically show immediate remorse, break down emotionally, and confess relatively quickly. Chris showed none of that. He maintained his lies for days, only confessing when physical evidence made lying impossible. The case also highlighted the concept of family annihilation as a specific category of murder. According to research by forensic psychiatry experts, family annihilators typically fall into category. One category is the self-righteous annihilator, who kills his family and then himself because he's lost his job or faces financial ruin and sees no way out, believing he's saving his family from suffering. Another category is the disappointed or self-centered annihilator who kills his family because they're obstacles to a life he wants, which is the category Chris Watts falls into. This type sees family members as possessions or impediments rather than as people he loves. Statistics on family annihilation show that in the United States, approximately 20 family annihilation events occur per year, killing roughly 100–200 people annually. The vast majority of perpetrators are men. The vast majority kill their intimate partners and children. Common triggering factors include separation or divorce, financial crisis, and infidelity, all of which were present in the Watts case. Let's talk about what happened after the conviction and what the broader impact has been. Chris Watts was initially housed in a Colorado state prison. However, due to death threats from other inmates and for his own safety, he was transferred out of state. He's currently incarcerated at Dodge Correctional Institution in Walpun, Wisconsin. He's in general population, not in protective custody or isolation. He reportedly works a prison job and follows the standard inmate routine. In prison, Chris has given multiple interviews to investigators, authors, and researchers. In February 2019, several months after his sentencing, he participated in an extensive interview with FBI agents and CBI investigators. During this interview, he finally told what investigators believe is the full truth about what happened. Chris admitted that his previous confession, the one where he claimed Shanann killed the girls and he killed her in response, was a lie. The truth, he said, was that he killed Shanann first, then killed Bella and Celeste afterward. He provided details that were extremely disturbing and painful for Shanann's family when they learned of them. He described strangling Shanann on their bed while she was sleeping or just waking up. He described her pleading with him to stop, asking him why. He described how long it took for her to stop breathing. Then he described going to the girls' room. He said he smothered Celeste first. Then he took Bella to another room. According to Chris, Bella was awake and aware of what was happening. She asked him, "Is the same thing going to happen to me as Cece?" meaning Celeste. And he said yes, and then he smothered her. This detail, when released in media reports, devastated people who had followed this case. A 4-year-old girl asking her father if he was going to kill her like he killed her sister, and him doing it anyway, is almost incomprehensible. Chris also admitted in this interview that his motive was exactly what investigators suspected. He wanted to be with Nicole. He wanted a new life without the complications of his existing family. He didn't want to deal with divorce, custody, and co-parenting, so he decided to eliminate them. He stated that on the morning of August 13th, before Shanann got home from Arizona, he had already decided he was going to kill her and the girls. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision when she confronted him about the affair. It was premeditated. He had decided, and when the opportunity came, he acted. This confession provided closure in terms of knowing the full truth, but it also made the crime even more horrific because it confirmed the worst suspicions. Chris Watts coldly and deliberately murdered his entire family, including his own children, to start a new relationship. The case has had significant cultural impact beyond just the immediate facts. It became one of the most discussed and analyzed true crime cases in recent years. A Netflix documentary called American Murder: The Family Next Door was released in September 2020. The documentary used actual footage, home videos, social media posts, text messages, police body cam and interrogation footage, and other primary sources to tell the story. It was viewed by tens of millions of people globally, and introduced the case to audiences who might not have followed it. The case has also become a case study in law enforcement training. The initial welfare check bodycam footage is used to teach officers how to recognize behavioral indicators of deception. The interrogation techniques used to get Chris to confess are studied as examples of effective interviewing. The rapid progression from missing persons report to confession to body recovery, all within 72 hours, is considered exemplary police work in terms of efficiency. But the case also raised uncomfortable questions about social media and the facades people present online. Shanann's Facebook page showed a perfect life, but the reality was a marriage falling apart and financial stress. The house they lived in was in pre-foreclosure, meaning they were behind on mortgage payments and facing potential foreclosure. Credit card debt was significant. The Thrive business that Shanann promoted as successful was actually not generating substantial income. The gap between the social media image and the reality was enormous. This has led to broader discussions about the pressure people feel to present perfect lives on social media, the way social media can mask serious problems, and how we shouldn't assume that what people show online is the full picture of their lives. The case also forced discussions about recognizing potential for violence in intimate partners. Shanann's friends have said that in hindsight, there were small signs that something was off with Chris in the weeks before the murders. He lost weight and got more physically fit, which some thought was a positive change, but actually coincided with his affair and his desire to look good for Nickel. He seemed happier and more upbeat, which people thought meant things were improving, but actually meant he was getting what he wanted from his affair and was planning to leave his family. He was distant from Shanann, but that was explained away as normal marital ups and downs. The reality is that Chris Watts showed very few of the warning signs that domestic violence prevention organizations typically tell people to watch for. He had no history of physical abuse. No police had ever been called to the Watts home for domestic disturbances. There were no protective orders. Shanann's friends weren't concerned for her physical safety before the murders. This case represents a type of intimate partner violence that's harder to predict. When someone with no history of violence, driven by selfish motive rather than rage or control issues, decides to kill. We're not saying that everyone who has an affair is going to become a family annihilator. The vast majority of people, even when relationships end badly, even when there's infidelity, don't resort to murder. Chris Watts is an extreme outlier, but the case does serve as a reminder that people can hide their true nature, that someone can appear normal and even kind while being capable of horrific acts, and that we should never assume we fully know what someone is capable. Officially, the case is closed. Chris Watts pleaded guilty. He's serving multiple life sentences. There are no appeals in progress because he pleaded guilty rather than being convicted at trial. The criminal case is resolved conclusively. Shanann's family continues to honor her memory and the memories of Bella, Celeste, and Nico. They have established scholarships in the children's names. They have spoken publicly about domestic violence awareness and the importance of recognizing that danger can come from unexpected sources. They have tried to keep Shanann's memory alive as more than just a murder victim, emphasizing who she was as a person, a daughter, a sister, a mother. Chris's family, his parents, and his sister have had limited public presence since the case concluded. They initially made statements that seemed to defend Chris or blame Shanann, which created significant backlash. They have since largely withdrawn from public view. Nicole Kessinger, the woman Chris was having an affair with, has completely disappeared from public life. She cooperated with the investigation, gave extensive interviews to police, provided all her communications and evidence. She was never charged with any crime because there's no evidence she had any knowledge of or involvement in the murders. However, she's been subject to intense online harassment and speculation. She's reportedly changed her name and moved to a different area to escape the attention. Her life was essentially destroyed by her involvement with Chris Watts, even though she was a victim of his deception as well. But we've reached a point where we must acknowledge what this case teaches us. Family annihilation, while rare, is a real phenomenon. The warning signs aren't always obvious. People who seem normal can hide dark intentions. Social media facades can mask terrible realities. And when someone decides they want a different life badly, and some people, a tiny minority of deeply disordered individuals, will choose murder over the normal difficulties of ending relationships and dealing with responsibilities. Here's what we know from the complete official record. Chris Watts murdered his pregnant wife Shanann and his daughters Bella and Celeste in the early morning hours of August 13, 2018. He disposed of their bodies at a remote oil field location. He reported them missing and lied to police for days. He was identified as deceptive within hours by investigators. He confessed within 48 hours of the missing persons report. He pleaded guilty to all charges and is serving life without parole. Current status is that the case is closed. Chris Watts is incarcerated at Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin. He will die in prison. There are no pending legal proceedings. the criminal justice process is complete. What we learned from this case is that deception can sometimes be identified quickly through behavioral analysis and evidence inconsistencies. The initial responding officers and investigators did excellent work recognizing Chris's lies early. The case also showed that rapid evidence collection and processing, combined with effective interrogation techniques, can solve cases quickly. From missing persons report to confession to body recovery, all happened in 72 hours, which is extraordinarily fast for a homicide. We also learned that family annihilation is a specific type of crime with identifiable characteristics, that understanding the psychology helps investigators recognize it quickly. And we learned that social media can create false impressions of people's lives, that what's presented online may be very different from reality, and we shouldn't judge the health of relationships based on social media posts. What remains is the tragedy of 3 innocent lives, Shanann, Bella, and Celeste, and an unborn child, Nico, taken by someone who should have protected them. The question that haunts everyone who examines this case is the same one that people ask about many family annihilation cases. How could a father do this to his own children? The psychological answer involves narcissism, objectification of others, extreme selfishness, and lack of empathy. But emotionally, it remains difficult to comprehend. If this case made you think about the masks people wear, the dangers of assumptions based on appearances, and the importance of recognizing deception, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. We're covering cases that examine the darkest aspects of human behavior and the investigative techniques that bring justice. Drop a comment about what you think drives family annihilation and how we might better identify risk factor. Share this video with anyone interested in understanding criminal psychology and how investigators identified Chris Watts as deceptive within hours of meeting him.